Build Show. Steve Baczek, architect. Yeah, we're out here on the job site. Now, you might remember from the last time we were out here, we were talking about floor framing. Well, yeah, we got some walls up. We're going to talk about wall framing this week. Very exciting stuff. Framing is always one of my favorite things to talk about. So let's get after it.
Multi-generational home on a budget. A Build original series brought to you by Zip System Building Enclosures, Fantech, New Wool, Bosch Home Comfort.
All right, folks, so wall framing. Pretty fundamental aspect of the rough frame. Here we're doing 2x6s, 24 inches on center. Now, there's 3 different spacings that can typically happen. 16 inches is pretty typical. 24 inches is what we're using here. You can also go down to 19.2. You can even go down to 12 inches on center. So there are basically 4 different spacings. In my 30 years, I've never seen a 19.2 wall. I've seen 16s and 24s, maybe a couple walls that were 12-inch on center because they were 16 feet tall on the ocean or something like that. There's a specific condition to get that added strength. But here, this location, 2x6s, 24 inches on center, 2x6s. We call them 2x6, but understand that they're not 2 inches. It's actually 1.5 inches by 5.5 inches, right? After they get planed and dressed, it takes it out. The rough board was actually 2x6, and then they clean it up to make it the stud here. The basic nomenclature, and I'm gonna grab my surveyor stick here. The basic nomenclature, this is basically a common stud. Common stud is one that just kind of fills in the frame as we go along the wall. When we get to a window opening, there's a multitude of parts. The part that goes, or the stud that goes inside that doesn't go to the top and stop at what we call the header, this is either called a jack or a trimmer stud. The one that runs on the outside, which is exactly the same as one of the common studs, but in this case we call it a king stud when it's attached to the window or door opening. And notice that one goes all the way up to the top. The header, which is this piece, and header is just another way of saying window beam or door beam, right? It's picking up the load from this floor truss and this floor truss and that floor truss, working like a beam, bringing it over, putting that load into the jack and running that jack down to the foundation. Foundation resists the load, building stands up, we have a successful building. That's basically the science behind the basic structure of a window and door opening. In this case here, we do pocket headers. I like to do pocket headers. You've heard me say this before, that it gives the insulator the opportunity to insulate when the insulator does what the insulator does when the insulator does it, right? I know it sounds like a little bit of a riddle there, but by having this pocket here, pushing that header, and that's an LVL header pushed all the way to the outside, basically the beam, but it creates that pocket. So rather than sitting there trying to cut rigid insulation, sandwich it between 2x10s, 2x12s, we push the header all the way to the outside, revealing this pocket. So now when the insulator comes to insulate the cavity of the wall, they just insulate that cavity as well as the cavity of the wall. So the insulator does what the insulator does when the insulator does it. Now, notice these are pretty deep cavities. Because of the width of that door opening and this window opening, we can get away with a 1-ply LVL header. But if we come down here and just take a quick look, you notice this header here, these openings here are not 3 or 4 foot, they're on the order of about 5 foot, 5.5 feet. So the header here is actually a 2-ply header, which means 2 LVLs next to each other. So that diminishes that pocket dimension or depth a little bit. So basically those headers are tuned to the load that they're carrying from above. And that's a lot to do with the width of that opening. Another thing to notice, this is a door here. Any openings where we exceed 3 feet, the structural engineer calls for a double trimmer. So you can see there's 2 jacks here and 2 jacks there. The reason for that is that a certain width develops a certain load. That certain load, in this case here, is pretty darn light. So the load that comes down on the trimmer, right, the success of this connection is really all about the bearing area of the header relative to the top of the trimmer. So in this case here, we have 1.5 by 5.5 or 2 by 6, let's just call it somewhere around 10 square inches. For a header that exceeds 3 feet, we need a little bit more than that 10 square inches of bearing area. So the way that we get it is by doubling up the trimmer. And now, because we have 4 jacks there, we end up with 20 square inches of bearing so that it's able to receive a much higher load. Now, if this was a 12-foot opening for a very large window, we might in fact either go to an engineered wood column there or a triple jack system. Because again, it's all based on the bearing area of the top of those jacks. A couple other notes on the wall frame out here. Notice we have our treated mud sill, the one that touches the concrete, and then we have a 2 by 6 mud sill on top of that. That bottom one is actually a 2 by 8, and we're going to jump outside and talk about that in a second. But the whole reason for the double sill is really being driven by what we're doing to the floor here. So in the case of this floor, we're actually going to come in, we're going to put down 1.5 inches of insulation. That will be our thermal break, basically between the concrete slab. Now, this concrete slab is insulated from underneath. That's also basically our thermal barrier, if you will. But on the top here, being a multi-gen house, we didn't want the older couple that's going to be living in the ADU here, the parents, to have a hard surface. Now, I know you say, well, I mean, how much does it really make a difference? I've done thousands of homes in the Southwest where slab-on grades were the norm out there. One of the biggest feedbacks that we got from our homeowners that had purchased the homes from the company that I was working with was, man, I'm retired, I'm home all day, I'm walking around the concrete slab. I can really feel it in my knees and my lower back walking around on that concrete slab with tile on it. The floor doesn't really have any give to it. So one of the things we talked through with the clients here was a little bit of give to the aging parents. But number 2, the mom wanted to make sure that we had a real hardwood floor down here. So we can't just go shooting our hardwood floor into the slab below. So we had to develop a detail where we'll put rigid insulation down, then we'll put a subframe that we can then put a top layer of the Zip X Factor or Huber X Factor on top of that. And then we will have a floor down here that is equally acceptable as the floor above to a true hardwood floor. So we get a floor with give, we get the aesthetics of that true 3/4 inch hardwood floor. Everybody's happy. It works out extremely well. And the way we start that detail is by having that double top plate. Let's take a jump outside and we'll talk about why that 2 by 8 plate is at the bottom. All right, so outside here, notice, again, we have that 2 by 6 plate sits on the 2 by 8 plate, and you can see that 2 by 8 plate basically makes a ledge going around the house. And you're probably wondering why we have that ledge. So the idea behind that ledge is we're going to sheathe the whole house in Zip R9 sheathing. So The Zip R9 actually has the 7/16 inch zip, and it's attached to 1.5 inches of polyiso rigid insulation. So together it makes a 1 15/16 inch insulated wall panel that we could get into the building science of later, but that dimension is basically right here, right? That 1 15/16 allows us to come down and basically attached to that. We get our shear nailing on the plate above, and the bottom plate provides us that closure so no rodents are going to go up and try and burrow into that rigid insulation. It basically protects the end of that Zip R9 by creating that ledge there. So let's jump back inside. There is one other thing that I want to talk to you about before we head upstairs and take a look at the framing up there. So let's just jump inside and talk a little bit about this knee wall. All right, so before we head upstairs, like I said, let's just talk a little bit about the knee wall. Because this has a full foundation on the far side and basically a walkout on this side, we have to have a series of intermediate steps throughout the foundation system to get us from the 9-foot tall wall down to 0 feet at the floor. And so what you end up with is a bunch of these steps in the foundation. You can see this one steps up, comes across, and then over here we have another step up, and then we have the final step up that takes us to that full height. So you get to see these 3 drops. Now, these 3 drops we have to account for somehow in insulation and framing. So what's going to happen here is we're going to basically insulate the wall here, and then we'll frame a 2x4 wall in front of it that will come up and tie into this wall, and we'll have the top of that wall fully insulated there. So I just wanted to talk to you about that. And you know, the air sealing detail here is the same air sealing detail along the mud sill. It just turns the corner, runs vertical, and then basically runs horizontal there. So let's take a walk upstairs and check out the wall framing up there. So I'll see you up there. Hey, Brett. So,
Steve.
We're able to catch up with Brett. If you remember from some of the earlier videos, Brett is not only the client, but he's also the builder. So
sir.
This is your house. You're in charge, general contractor. Green Logic Builders, your partner Dana,
Yep.
is the other half of Green Logic. I see we're up here on the first floor. We got the whole basement level framed up.
Yep.
And got this floor going. We got the guys from Lifetime Contracting here going hot and heavy.
Working
How are
hard.
things going out here?
Things are going well. We've been dealing with New England winter, so we had some starts and stops dealing with the snow, but we've had a good stretch of weather, so we've been able to make some progress. We've had some, say, irregularities in our floor trusses, so dealing with dimensional lumber and spans greater than 16 feet, you're ending up with multiple plies of dimensional lumber. So we've had some areas where we've had some, say, swelling, twisting maybe.
Yep.
So instead of traditionally framing the wall on the ground, sheathing it, standing it up, to kind of deal with some of the irregularities, we've basically framed the wall on a string line so that we're staying level and kind of taking...
So you can track the level nature of the top plate as you frame the wall. Because
Exactly.
it can't be consistent because the floor isn't quite perfectly consistent.
We don't have engineered floor joists here, and you know, we didn't really have the option to, because we have to fit our mechanical system. We didn't build a massive house where we just have tons of space to fit our ductwork. We're taking advantage of every square inch, and that means utilizing our floor system for our mechanicals. So,
Yeah. You know, you make a really interesting point. When we talk about, you know, building on a budget, which we are here, and by all means, this is, you know, for the Boston market, which we're in, you know, this is what we would consider an affordable home.
Sure.
in the Boston market. But with that becomes these questions or these needs of, yeah, we need to move to an open web truss because we don't have a basement below.
Right.
And so we need to put our whole basement worth of mechanical space inside this 14-inch floor frame. So we have to move the floor trusses. Well, manufactured floor trusses, just by their nature of having 30 of them across here, maintaining a consistent depth on them and manufacture can become a little bit of a challenge. And the labor force that's available to man those machines in the truss factory, there's a lot of things that get called into question that puts us out here in a situation where we're working with Victor, who owns the framing crew out at Lifetime, and we're deciding to make decisions like, hey, we'll string the wall and we'll build it standing instead of building it on the floor and standing it up.
And they have been great because obviously they're making their money by getting in here, framing the walls in the ground, standing them up, and keep it moving on to the next floor. So he has had my back, and he's been willing to.
And he's working with you.
work.
You know, one of the interesting things, we were joking about it earlier, but notice Victor on the ladder there, right? You can see what's hanging from his neck.
He's working on our next floor truss layout.
This is framing specialist in 2024 that one of their tools is an iPad strapped to his shoulder. And all the PDF drawings are there, and he can bring them up, he can zoom in.
Well, because he's not going to be up there on the ladder with these 24 by 36 sheets there. It's windy up here, that's unwieldy. And then being on your phone, that's also small. So having the tablet that he can strap to his back, I mean, it's genius.
Yeah.
It works.
And it works extremely well.
Yeah.
So, so, I mean, things are working great. I see we got the moment frame in. Ackles did a good job. They're always, you know, Ackles Steel, they always do a good job. They do the shop drawings. They come out, they pre-measured.
Yep.
Then they go into fabrication. They fabricate it. Then they come out and install it. So it's a complete package with them. You know, really, really great guys to work with. We've done a bunch of work with them.
Experienced.
And
they were great.
they know what they're doing. Let's throw a little teaser out there to everybody. You can see there's a big opening there, and there is no deck outside of that, but notice that opening goes all the way to the floor. We got a really cool door that we're sourcing all of our windows from European Architectural Supply. They're triple glazed. We'll have an episode in the future where we talk about it, but as a teaser, we got a really big opening, and we're going to be putting in something that I've never done before.
Me neither, but
So,
I can't wait.
I can't wait either. So anyways, I'm going to let you get back to it, figuring out things with Victor. I'm going to go and talk a little bit more about floor or wall framing. We'll catch up at a later date, buddy.
Sounds great,
Always
Steve.
a pleasure, man.
Thank you so much.
All right, so we finally made it. We're up here on the first floor, upper level, and you can see I have that steel moment frame behind me here. Now, like we talked about, it's comprised of an W shape, and it's not really a W shape, it's an I-beam, but in this case, it's the column. This goes all the way down to the foundation below. It's probably on the order of about 12 feet or so. That gets heavily bolted here. You can see there's flanges on the bottom and on the top. Those get bolted through. It gets bolted to these side connectors here, through there, comes all the way down here, and again, has that heavy connection sequence here of the top plate and the bottom plate. Now, when you're dealing with a moment frame, remember, this thing resists bending, right? It's a very stiff member. To be just a beam, we would just need the plate at the bottom. Now, the plate at the top resists the bending because when that beam wants to deflect, that top cord or top flange wants to move away from the column. But those 3 bolts up on top on this side, the 3 bolts on the other side, resist that and make for a very stiff connection because the beam is sitting inside that top and bottom plate as opposed to just the bottom plate where that beam can rotate on that bottom plate. But having it connected at the top too, it can't rotate. And that's how we develop that moment connection and make that very stiff. Now, like I spoke of down below, the reason we have a moment frame here is we have a large door opening here in the wall frame that's going to take us out to a future deck out here. And then we have this very large window opening here that looks out onto the deck and onto the street and the woods beyond. Now, we only have, you know, maybe about 10 inches of wall there. We have maybe about 16 inches of wall there, and in, you know, 12 foot plus, that's really not a lot to develop resistance in shear. And remember, shear loading is actually dependent on what we would call the aspect ratio, right? The aspect ratio is how tall the wall is relative to how wide that shear panel is, right? So if I have a 12-foot wall and I have 6 feet of wall to develop shear, that's actually a pretty good scenario, right? Because the aspect ratio is like 0.5, the width to the height. But if I only have 1 foot of wall, now my aspect ratio is 1/12 of the wall, right? 1 foot to the 12-foot length of the wall. So I really don't have any wall there to speak of to develop that shear. So in that case, we have to go to this steel moment frame here to help us develop that shear. Now, that's why we have it here. We also have one over here, and this one's very similar to the one we have down below. You know, we have this huge open space here. We basically have this wall that goes down the side of the house, and actually it's 58 feet. So from that corner to the far corner is 58 feet, and we have no perpendicular walls to that one long wall. Now, the shear requirements are every 25 feet of wall, you get a one-time exemption for 35 feet, but we're at 58 feet. So we need to develop some type of shear resistance in this direction. We have that long wall, the wind blows on this wall, we have nothing that helps support that 58-foot wall against the wind. Hence, we come in here now, the wind blows on that wall, and we have this steel beam pushing back on that wall, developing that shear resistance in the moment frame. The guys are about to put the top plate on top. We have holes throughout that top flange that Acco Steel, who fabricated all the steel for us, put that together, put all of those holes, pre-drilled it, and you can see this cap plate actually has a bunch of the holes on it that goes up on top there, but they're going to put that up on top. They're going to bolt it together. We're going to put a floor truss on top of that. The floor truss will get screwed to that top plate that sits on top of that beam. And now our whole floor diaphragm up there is tied into that steel frame there, and again, works in concert to, now when the wind blows, this whole floor frame is in fact pushing back at that wind or leaning into the wind via the work of that steel beam. So 2 moment frames doing slightly 2 different jobs, but both battling lateral resistance in the deficiencies of the wood framed wall. So lastly, let's talk a little bit about the headers. We talked about them down below, and you can see here we have some large openings. We have our double trimmers that we talked about down below, but notice we don't have pocket headers up here. We have solid headers. The reason they're solid headers, again, these are larger openings, so to develop that beam that the header is, we basically have a 3-ply up here as opposed to the 1 and 2-ply that we have happening downstairs on some of those smaller openings. So in this case here, we solely rely on the outside. We have our zip R9 panel that's going to get attached to the wall framing out there. So at the very least, we'll have a continuous sheet of R9 on the outside of that header working as an insulator. You know, one of the things that you don't want to discount, it's not a lot, but even this packed out wood beam does offer a certain amount of R value. I mean, wood beams are typically somewhere about 1.25, 1.25 R value per inch. So the 5.5 inch, we're somewhere like 5.8, plus the R9 on the outside. We have R14 at that wall system, but this is a really great argument for why it's so important to put that rigid insulation around the building. And some of you might have seen me do this example before, but when we think about building and we're thinking about, okay, we have our 2x6s, they're on 24-inch on center, they march across here. If I just put insulation in the cavity and I don't put anything on the outside, it's like putting a jacket on and having little strips cut and left open on my jacket. It really doesn't make for a very good thermal blanket or jacket around my body if I have a bunch of series of strips here that are letting the cold February air in. So the house is exactly the same, right? It has an internal generator of heat like our bodies. The heat loss is out through our bodies. In the house, it's out through the wall. And we want to basically stop that heat loss and keep that heat inside. The whole reason we wear a jacket. And by putting that on the outside is just like my jacket. It's a nice continuous effort around my body to harness that heat energy that my body is generating so that I don't lose it. It's exactly what's happening in the building here. So anyways, I think that's it for today. We can return, we'll be a floor up. We can talk a little bit more about wall framing next time. So until next time, Steve Baczek Architect, we're out here at our multi-gen project here that's on a budget, talking wall framing. So we'll see you next time. All right, so we're back at the studio here. We got some drawings, we got some plans and details. Let's check them out. Here's the second floor plan. I'm just gonna expand that a little. We arrive at the top of the stairs there. We have our hallway. You know, one of the things about second floors that I found that's probably the most important thing is where the stairs hit the second floor and how long the hallway is, right? Remember, we're trying to keep this house on a budget, means we're trying to keep that square footage down. We have about 1,000 square feet per floor plan. And that's not a whole lot of space, right? Especially when you're talking 3 bedrooms, you know, his and her walk-in closets, 2 bathrooms, and a laundry room, and the staircase in 1,000 square feet. So you really have to try and get that hallway as short as you possibly can, because you don't want to put money into a hallway and have this very long hallway. So again, that 58 foot, what's nice about having this kind of long drawn out house is about half of the floor plan down below here is all owner suite. So that allows us to keep that hallway very, very short. So again, we arrive on the second floor here. You can see the hallway is just that space there. We have bedroom 3 and bedroom 2, both of which have very sizable closets, you know, 7 foot on that one and about 5 foot on that one. And the rooms are pretty generous, you know, 11 by 12, 14 by 11. You know, for kids' bedrooms today, in a very modest house, those are really good sized bedrooms, right? And the beauty is that, again, remember, this is the south side, this is the north side. So again, all of those utilities getting packed: stairway, secondary bathroom, walk-in closet, and then owner's bath on that north side. On the south side, we're getting some really nice exposure to the owner's bath, and then each of these kids' bedrooms get some really nice glass, which means they get some really nice light in, but they get some really nice views out to the woods that are
out here on the side of the house. So bedrooms 2, 3, pretty simple. Moving down the hall, we have a centrally located laundry room there with a side-by-side, squeezed in a little counter there. And then coming into the owner's suite where we breach right there, we have his and her walk-in closets. So we were able to get them separate. And then we have what I would consider a pretty generous room. It's 13 feet by 13 feet. Again, drawing in the furniture there, you know, we have a king-size bed there with a nice transom window above. So we'll be able to get some nice ambient light coming in through there. And then we finish this with, you know, what I would consider a pretty luxurious bathroom for a 2,000 square foot house. We have a nice soaking tub here with an accent wall. It has its own window to create a nice atmosphere kind of on that side of the bathroom. When you immediately walk in, we have our double vanity there. So we have quick access to those sinks. And then down here, we have a little nook for the toilet, but it has its own window so you don't feel like you're sitting in a hallway. And then of course, we have the true walk-in shower here with a bench with, again, some nice south light coming through that transom window to just fill that shower with an abundance of light. So, I mean, overall, like I said earlier, I really like these long, thin type profiles for floor plans. I think they work very, very well. You know, they certainly fit on nice, long, thin lots, but we weren't doing it here because of the space. We were doing it here to get access. You know, we're, again, climate zone 5 here, so getting access to that sun for the winter here is pretty important. So anyways, that's the second floor plan.
Hey, Steve Baczek, architect for the Build Show. We're out at our multi-gen project. Just want to take a second to thank one of our sponsors for being part of the project. Now, their sponsorship allows us to bring you all of this information. So credit to them for being on that educational train and allowing us to share some very valuable information with you. So Zip R Sheathing, it's by Huber Engineered Woods. Huber Engineered Woods creates systems for our exterior sheathing systems, our floor sheathing systems, and the Exacore product for acoustical and multifamily projects. Now, on this one here, we're using a Zip insulation product. It's their Zip R9. What that means is it has a resistance value of 9 built into the panel. I have a piece of it here. It is the standard 7/16 inch OSB panel, and then laminated to that is an 1.5 inches of polyisocyanurate, so that we call that an R panel, basically outsolation. Now this provides continuous insulation on the outside of the house here, basically putting a sweater on the house and wrapping the whole house, very much like the jacket is doing for me in the colder weather. Now, it doesn't stop there. The beauty of Zip R sheathing, in fact, is it is an exterior sheathing, closes off my building. It is an insulating sheathing, provides a thermal benefit and becomes part of my thermal barrier system control layer in the house. It is a weather resistive barrier. It has an integral WRB on the face of the sheathing. WRB, weather resistive barrier. It's dealing with rain. It also, even though it has insulating sheathing, it has shear numbers to it. So it can become part of the shear system for the overall house. There are numbers, our structural engineer uses them to calculate the shear. Lastly, it is our primary air barrier on our wall system. I said it's a system, it says system right on their board. And what that means is they don't just make the board, they make the tape to seal one board to the next board. And you can see that here, it's rolled, we have the flashing tape. In our window installation videos, you see we have stretch tape, we can make our pan flashings. They've totally developed the system where we can close in our buildings with that one system using one manufacturer's kit of parts to close it up. Thanks to Huber for joining in. Thanks to Huber for developing such a great system that makes our life real easy out here on the job site.